HanselMinutes.com. It's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman, hosted by Carl Franklin. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 80, recorded live Wednesday, September 5th, 2007. Support for Hansel Minutes is provided by Telerik RAD Controls, the most comprehensive suite of components for Windows Forms and ASP.NET web applications. Online at www.telerik.com. And by .NET Developers Journal, the world's leading .NET developer magazine. Online at www.sys-con.com. In this episode, Scott and Carl discuss Vista 64.
Hi, this is Carl Franklin. You're listening to Hansel Minutes from HanselMinutes.com. Scott and I are here, and you're here. That means we can get started. Hey, Scott.
Hello, sir. Vista 64.
Vista 64.
Vista 64. People are afraid of it. It's a whole new world. You got 32 extra bits, and it's very frightening. Now, you've been running 64 for a while, right?
Can I tell you something? I have only run, well, that's not true. On my desktop, I have only run Vista 64. On a laptop, I installed Vista 32. But 64 ran better than 32.
Okay. But would it be fair to say your initial experience with Vista 64 was not positive?
No.
Exactly. So I think what happened was that the people who would be the most likely to use 64 were the first people to install it, and those were the people who installed it the day that it came out. And there's nothing about Vista 64 that is any more of a problem than 32, except for drivers.
Right.
And of course, drivers are the first thing to be not done, I'm afraid. So initial experiences, out-of-box experience, they call that at Microsoft. There's a OOBE, OOBE, the out-of-box experience with Vista 64 was lousy. And I think you had some of those problems yourself.
I did. I'm using, audio drivers for not just your standard consumer audio, but pro audio systems from Mark of the Unicorn. And they took a while to come out. And not only that, but I had a RAID stripe that took a while to come out. And the drivers for Motu still aren't that good. I mean, I'm still finding that I go to record and the audio device isn't there. And I have to reboot the audio device, turn it off, turn it back on for those drivers to come back. So.
This is which device?
This is a Mark of the Unicorn, MOTU or Motu. And the model is 24IO, which is basically 24 balanced inputs and outputs.
Okay, so as a non-audio file, what I heard you say was this is a blah 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 thing I've never heard of, blah blah blah, unstable driver.
Yeah, that's right. Basically, that's exactly it. It's a pro audio rig, and took a while for the drivers to come out. It also took a while for the RAID drivers to come out for the Acrea. Is that how you say it? Acrea?
No idea.
Yeah, it's a RAID card that I have in there.
Okay.
Took a while for that to happen, too. Took a lot longer, actually.
So, basically, it all comes down to the drivers, and this has been my experience with Vista 64, and Jeff Atwood did a great job of helping me get my super machine hooked up. We tried to pick name brand stuff, and that's why I was teasing you about the sound card, because, I've never heard of that company. I'm sure that they're lovely, and amongst sound card companies, they're probably the greatest sound card in the universe. Yeah,
not consumer grade, pro grade.
Exactly. Pro grade stuff, but it all still comes down to that driver stuff. So you've got to get all those coders up to speed. They've got to test the hell out of it. Yeah. And they've got to get it signed, right? It was a signed driver.
That's right. All the 64-bit drivers have to be signed. And, that's something that even XP32 driver makers never bothered to do. If you ever noticed, you're installing something and you get the infamous dialog that says, "Warning, this driver is not signed. We don't know if it's actually valid," because nobody bothered to do it.
Yeah, because you're basically just trusting them, and it's one extra step. It just happens to be a step they don't worry about.
Right.
Sometimes you'll see installation programs say, just before the dialog pops up, "Hey, a scary dialogue is going to happen. Trust us and push yes." And that's the equivalent of them signing it. Exactly. Yeah. So I've just right-clicked on computer management, and I'm clicking on the device manager to take a look at some of the devices that I've got here. I've got an NVIDIA GeForce 8600 GTS. I've got the NVIDIA serial ATA controller. So my motherboard is a controller that is using the NVIDIA chipset. And this was all kind of part of Jeff's master plan, because I said that I needed this thing to be fast as possible, but I needed it to be stable. I just can't have this thing blue screen. So I don't want to go and fight with, some funky driver that I'm not used to. So It's got a very, very, very standard chipset. It's got a very, very standard and supported video card. Really, if you're not using NVIDIA or ATI video cards, what are you using? Things like the FireWire, they're all the standard, VIA chipset, stuff like that. Even the monitors I picked, all Dell, all the same. I just want everything clean. I just did not, the networking controller is an NVIDIA Enforce. So this really minimized my exposure to mixing and matching drivers, right? We've just got the NVIDIA chipset for the networking controller, for the SATA stuff. The sound controller is a basic controller. Shows up in Vista here as a high definition audio device. It's so boring and plain. And I have had really great experience with Vista 64. Haven't had any problems. Although I have heard a number of people, because they're getting 4 gigs of RAM or more on their machines, have really, really slow installs. Apparently, there are a couple of motherboards that have got a bit of a firmware bug where during the installation period, they'll blue screen. Not sure why. And almost universally, I've heard if you just drop down to 2 gigs of RAM, take out a stick or two for the installation and then put them back in, you're fine. Something's going on during the setup process. I don't know if you had that issue as well.
No, I didn't. I have 8 gigs of RAM, and I didn't have a slow setup. In fact, the setup was one of the more painless setups that I've ever had. Although I did have the experience, when Vista boots, if it's got a network connection, I believe it goes out and tries to install updates before it boots.
Yeah, looking for drivers and things like that.
Right. So, which is very cool. And it took a really long time in the beginning to get it up and running. In fact, I thought it was hung, so I just left it go overnight and came back in the morning, and it was at the prompt.
That's cool.
And it also did something nice. If it's at the prompt and waiting for you to log in, it powers down the machine. So when you come back in, you turn on the machine, boom, it's right up.
Yeah, this is an interesting thing to point out. Now, it may be just Vista specific, but I have had really great experiences with x64. I can't speak about this being 64 or x86, but as far as hibernate and sleep, it really works now. You can actually put a machine to sleep and it will come back. And I believe it has to do with just the firmware. It has to do with that, what is that called? ACPI?
Yeah. The power control stuff.
The power management spec for firmware. I think it's like ACPI level 2 or something like that. Have had really great experiences with the machine not falling asleep and dying. You know how sometimes machines tend to die in their sleep when it comes to Windows. One of the things that I've been monitoring on this particular machine more than I did on any other Vista machine is the reliability and performance monitor. I don't know if you've done that. Have you seen this? Are you in front of a Vista machine now?
I'm not in front of a Vista machine now.
If you go to your Vista machine and you type in reliability, not you, but everybody else, you'll get the perfmon, and then underneath the perfmon on the left side there's actually a reliability monitor. And this is a really great little kind of, not hidden, but certainly not advertised thing about Vista. And it's got a system stability chart, and it tracks 5 different aspects of the system: software installs and uninstalls, application failures, hardware failures, Windows failures, and miscellaneous failures. And then it gives you a 1 to 10 about how stable your system is. So, looking at my system from when I first installed it in July 21st, I can click on that date on this scrolling chart, and I can see all the different things that I installed for that day, drivers and everything. Had no failures at all from the 21st of July until the 2nd of August. And I can see that I had a system stability rating of 10. And then I'm going along, and then I see an X here where mmc.exe crashed. So then that lowered my stability rating, because you can only get a stability rating of 10 if nothing crashes. That means nothing at all. Okay? So then I go, and then I had, what was this one? devenv. So I was running a beta version of the developer environment, and I had that die. And then it lowered my stability rating. And then those stability ratings go back up as fewer things crash. Does that make sense? So I've had no hardware failures at all. That entire row is blank. Nothing has gone wrong. We had one miscellaneous failure. It says disruptive shutdown. The computer was not shut down properly. And this was because one of my UPSs failed. So it keeps track of all those different things, and it keeps track of what you installed on what day. And it really gave me a lot of insight in some of the background things. I can go back and see the date that a particular KB was installed. I can see when I installed my my wireless keyboard and things like that. Mm-hmm. Right now, I've got a stability index of 6.3, and it's climbing because I've installed a bunch of new stuff in the last couple of days as I've been playing around with some of the betas and whatnot. But it has been a really, really useful thing, and I would encourage people to look at the stability charts under the reliability monitor on their existing Vista machines, and then compare it to their Vista 64 machines. And I haven't had any problems.
Now, SP1 just came out, or was it a beta of SP1 that just came out?
So beta invitations for SP1 just came out. If you were in on the the Windows Server System 2003 beta or a number of other betas, you may have received an email from connect.microsoft.com saying that you could opt in to the beta for the service pack for Vista.
Yeah. Okay.
So they're saying it'll probably be, I think they announced January, February next year.
Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm running a Vista machine for mission critical, I'm not going to install betas of service packs.
Yeah, I think that the idea of a beta of a service pack is just not something that I'm willing to do. Certainly not on a machine that I need. I mean, I need this machine to be up all the time. Yeah. So, but at the same time, I think, and this is just an early adopter speaking, but I think it's silly to not install it now. I mean, if your drivers are available, the idea of, well, I'll wait for Service Pack 1, right? Mm-hmm. People are saying that because they think that it's obviously not ready for prime time today, but it'll be ready later. And it doesn't quite work like that. Hey, this milk is bad. Maybe it'll be better later. I'll put it back in the fridge. It's an ongoing thing. You've got Tuesday patches that come out all the time. Remember, just last week, there were 2 new hotfixes for Vista that fixed the long copy times problem.
Yeah.
Made a huge difference. The long copy times problem was a real irritant in Vista, where if you were copying a very large file, it would spend all this time calculating how long it would take and a lot less time copying. And you'd get these really low bit rates when copying large files across the network.
Right. It would hang on calculating remaining time when it gets to 99% and hang there for a long time.
Yeah. Huge irritant. Fixed. Yeah. So one of the things I think people kind of forget about is that Service Pack 1 is going to be a roll-up of a lot of these things. They are going to add some stuff in Service Pack 1, but it's not like it's going to be massively different from the ongoing patched version of something. So it's kind of something to think about.
The other thing I know about Vista from talking to Richard Campbell, co-host of .NET Rocks, you know who I'm talking about.
Of course.
He discovered a problem with the TCP IPv6 stack that interferes with the networking for IPv4, which is what most everybody in the world uses. Mm-hmm. So, and that can cause network slowdown. It can cause hanging, and the solution is to just disable IP6.
That there's problems with Firefox right now when it comes to debugging under Visual Studio, and also disabling IPv6 makes things better. If you're not using IPv6,
there's no reason to have
disable.
It. Yeah.
I pretty much disable anything that I'm not using if I can get away with it.
Yeah, there should be out there. How we have batch files that we pass around. The RDs pass them around there.
Sure.
How to turn off or shut off all non-critical services.
Yeah, I've got one called cleanprocesses.bat. I run it before I give a presentation.
Exactly.
Just calls netstop, shuts down the stuff I don't need for a presentation.
So do you have one for Vista as well?
I don't, because so far there hasn't been anything I didn't need to have running. This machine doesn't have wireless, so I don't have to shut down the wireless zero configuration monitor.
That'd be a nice PowerShell script, huh?
It would just call net shutdown and net service. But I've been running this thing almost like a server. I keep it really, really clean. Like I had said when I blogged about the initial purchase, that I wasn't going to pollute this thing at all. Let me see if I look at my virtual machines here. If I bring up my VMs, it's like we've got about 7 VMs right now.
Yeah, you were telling me this at my birthday party, actually, that you use Vista just as a launching platform for virtual machines. And V64 is perfect for that. And that's one of the whole reasons that I use the 64-bit operating systems in general, is because, working in VMs is really fast when you have memory, when you have RAM available.
With 4 gigs of RAM, my XP VM, again, running on an external hard drive, is at least as fast, if not faster, than my old Pentium 4, which is really cool. So if I'm looking here, I've got 3 Windows XP VMs. I've got one that I put all my crazy tools in. If I'm going to test a tool, I'll test it in a VM now. Because, of course, you can just drag the tool directly from the Explorer onto the VM. That sounds like a silly feature to tout, but the fact that I could just drag and drop onto the surface of the VM and copy a file.
Now, this is virtual PC you're using, right?
This is virtual PC.
Yeah.
I understand that VMware is a little bit faster, but I really just like virtual PCs. It's simple. It's out of the way. I don't sweat it.
Yeah.
I've got a fresh Windows XP Service Pack 2 that I do testing on any application that needs to run on a fresh machine. Got a Windows 98 machine, so I can dock my Newton. I got a copy of Ubuntu that I've been playing with Mono and Moonlight, the Silverlight for Linux.
Mm-hmm.
Got a Rails VM, so this is one for doing just Ruby on Rails. And then I've got an old Win. This is actually still, I don't actually use this VM, but it's basically a DOS 6.2 Windows 3.1 VM.
Use it for games?
No, just because it's fun to see running.
Yeah.
Sounds silly. I don't actually use it. So not 7, I've actually got 6, and then I've got that 3.1. One thing, though, that I did do that I didn't expect I would was I did install a couple of games on the thing. I had said I was going to keep it really clean, but I installed Guild Wars. Works great. And one thing I was actually pleasantly surprised at, I installed Steam. Steam, of course, is the Half-Life 2 game launcher. Half-Life 2 has a 64-bit process. If you run it once, it notices that you're on a 64-bit machine and then downloads a 64-bit version of Half-Life 2. And you can tell when a process is 64-bit by going into the Windows Task Manager, clicking on the Processes tab, and any process that is a 32-bit process has an asterisk 32 by it, and then anything that's a 64-bit process doesn't have that. So I watched the HL2 Half-Life 2.exe switch from a 32-bit process to a 64-bit process.
That's very cool.
So it can use memory more effectively. And then it also, one of the things that's nice about the Steam engine and the Half-Life 2 engine is that it uses all 4 processors on a quad proc.
Wow.
Jeff Atwood over at codinghorror.com has got a great article this week about, do you actually get a speed increase with dual core versus quad core? And it really comes down to whether or not the application was written to do that.
Well, Scott, speaking of non sequiturs, I got a story for you. So I have 2 machines here that I recently bought for the new studio for my 2 editors, Lawrence Ryan and Brandon Wen, who work on the shows here at Pop Productions. So I decided to get all the parts from Newegg and put them together, which is something I like to do. I went in phases. I started out in life loving to build machines, and then for a while there, it was just a nightmare, and I didn't want to deal with it. And now I'm back to liking it again. But so I put these machines together, and we fired them up, and they started using them, and they were blue screening. And that's when we started talking about doing a blue screen debugging show on DNR TV. And right, I thought, how fortuitous is this? Let's do this.
I actually saw one of them blue screen in the wild. I watched it happen.
Right. So, and the blue screens got more and more frequent, and I actually looked up the codes, and they were just completely random. There was 3 codes that it was blue screening with. One was unknown error, which is always fun. And the other is some obscure error that when you look it up on the website, on Microsoft's website, it says something like, millions of things could cause this.
Right.
Yeah. So
at this point, you can't trust your machine. Right. This is the thing about blue screens, right? It's like catching your wife cheating on you. You can never trust them again. My machine has failed me. No, not my wife. I'm just saying that when
my
something
wife,
like that,
okay.
Yeah, exactly.
My wife cheating on you. Wait a second.
No, what I'm saying is that when a machine blue screens, it's a violation of your trust. You put your trust into the machine. Well, there's that too, but I'm thinking more philosophically.
Right. No, yeah, you're right. You can't trust the machine. So if it blue screens once in a few months, you might chalk it up to a bug. But if it blue screens fairly regularly, you're thinking, okay, there's a problem. So
exactly.
This is a very interesting story, and I'll share it with you. So weird things were happening on these machines, like video was not refreshing on the desktop, and you could take a window and move it all around the desktop, and it would leave trails. That was one thing that would happen randomly. Another thing that would happen was one of the guys would go to do a mix down, which is when you take all the multiple tracks that are happening all at once with different pan and volume settings and all that, and you combine them into a single stereo track. And in a portion of the mix down where you would expect to see a conversation, there was just pink noise, which is just like every frequency, just complete random noise. Mm-hmm. And for a serious block of a chunk of it. That sounds like just memory just dumped itself into a file. Well, that's exactly what gave me that hint that I thought it was memory, because it looked like it just got the wrong address somewhere, or the memory was corrupt, and so I'm thinking it was RAM.
Did you swap the RAM out?
So I didn't swap the RAM out. The first thing I did was I went back to Newegg, and I looked at the comments that people leave for the products that they buy.
One of the greatest things ever done.
It was for the motherboard. I checked for the motherboard, and that was the first thing I checked. And the comments for the first guy said, pros, good motherboard, blah, blah, blah. Cons, I had to manually adjust the SPD settings and manually tweak it to get this board stable. Now, what the SPD settings are, some sort of, and you probably know more about this, but it's like a speed matching for the RAM. It's like a multiplier for the RAM to get it to sync correctly to the motherboard. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's set to auto in the BIOS.
Right.
And then there's a couple
SPD
other options starting from 2.0 to 3.3 to, 2.5. Right?
Yeah. SPD is basically, it's called serial presence detect. And it's a little tiny EEPROM that's on the memory module itself, and it keeps track of all the speed information about that memory.
Yeah.
And you use programs. There's different RAM checking programs that you can use. And if you have the wrong data in that SPD, systems will crash. Typically, it's not something you're supposed to have to change.
Right.
The motherboard is supposed to use that data to configure the access to the memory module.
Exactly.
So the module is supposed to come programmed correctly. So that's very odd.
So before I went and tweaked it, because I don't want to tweak things without knowing what I'm doing, I downloaded the Microsoft RAM tester, the memory tester utility from Microsoft.
It's a Microsoft-specific utility.
Yeah, Microsoft-specific utility. You download it, you make a boot CD-ROM or a floppy. In my case, it was a CD-ROM. It boots up and it just exercises RAM, and it tells you how many failures, how many passes, and it just keeps running until you press a key. And within the first minute, failure.
Wow.
So I went and I set the SPD setting to the second highest value.
Okay.
And at first I set it to the lowest value, and that worked. Then I set it to the second highest value, thinking, well, the highest one is probably giving me the problem. I'll try the second highest.
Right. She just backed it off a notch. It's almost like when there were problems with video drivers, and you would go to that performance slider and you'd pull it back one.
That's it. Well, that worked. So,
and you have no problems. Haven't had a problem since.
Haven't had a problem since. They've been humming along for a week and a half.
Wow. That's obscure. How is anyone supposed to figure that out?
Exactly. If that guy hadn't left a comment on Newegg.com, I would have probably sent them back, or tried to.
I think you've pegged on one of the really, really valuable things about the internet, specifically for buying hardware. If you're going to build your own machine, don't just take the recommendations of friends or me or whoever, but look at the comments, especially if you've got 100+ comments about a piece of hardware. Such a fountain of information can be found in sites like Newegg, sites like Amazon, where they allow someone to have a review, and more people are doing their reviews in that format. Pros and cons. Here's what's great. Here's what's not. Yeah. Allowing you to make a really, educated decision about it. And we tried to do that when I put together this machine because, with a Dell, they're going to be a little more conservative. They're going to put together a series of components, some Dell made, some purchased, that are going to give you a good experience, but a conservative experience. We wanted to go a little beyond that, but I don't know if this motherboard's going to hate that memory, which is going to hate that video card. So that's perfect. So you didn't have to swap the memory, buy a new memory. It was just a setup.
Nope. No. It was happening on both machines, and they had the same kind of RAM, same kind of everything. Mm-hmm. And the motherboard was the first place I looked. Just so happened that was it.
Fantastic.
Well, Scott, I think that's a show.
I think that's a show.
All right. It's been a pleasure, as always.
All right. I'll see you next week.
And as for you, dear listener, we'll see you next time on Hansel Minutes.